Hey everyone, if you're a regular listener of this show, you know about my passion for methylation and how homocysteine levels might just be the most underrated biomarker for longevity. A healthy homocysteine level is less than 15, and mine was 63. Well, guess what? It's now 10. This is where our Methylation Support Plus product comes in, as it optimizes methylation health and promotes healthy homocysteine. So if you're passionate about longevity like I am, go to shop.mindbodygreen.com/support15 to get 15% off your first order of Methylation Support Plus.
Over the next 10 years, people, I predict, will do more and more plasma because it's low cost. Is something you can, on an iterative basis, do. And so then my philosophy is that in 2 years, more and more people will begin to realize that ideally they are going to want to have plasma or other growth factors regularly injected into their joints, into their muscles, into their nerves to maintain them at the health and age that they are at, and that we will be able to sustain and maintain their body at that age. And then everything else that we're talking about is just window dressing around that concept.
Hey everyone, if you listened to last week's episode with 102-year-old Dr. Gladys McGarry, you know the fundamentals of longevity are actually very simple: movement, purpose, gratitude, and love. Now, today's episode with Dr. Matt Cook is quite the contrast, but it's just as fascinating. Here we'll talk about all the biohacking tools you can use for longevity, from NAD infusions to peptide injections to stem cell therapy and more. Matt is a board-certified anesthesiologist with over 20 years of experience and a pioneering regenerative medicine expert. He focuses on repairing and restoring health on a cellular level using minimally invasive treatments to help the body heal itself naturally. He's even the guy functional medicine doctor Mark Hyman goes to when he's in a pinch, and Matt also treats a number of my friends who absolutely adore him. And today, he's here to talk about all the biohacking tools that will transform longevity as we know it, including a very interesting POV on microdosing Ozempic. Matt, welcome.
Hey, great to be with you, Jason. Thank you so much.
So great to finally have you. You treat a number of my good friends, and you're the guy who Mark Hyman famously said he goes to when he's in a pinch. It's you, Matt Cook. And so can we start by briefly talking about your background and the type of medicine you practice?
Oh, yeah, thank you. It's funny, everybody always asks that question. And so then, there's a million different answers of I always try to motivate people that are on a hero's journey, and that their narrative and their story will ultimately evolve and change. But I thought I was going to be an expedition sports medicine sort of oriented person. So then I went into anesthesia so I could take extended trips and go to Everest and do all the stuff that I thought I was going to spend my life doing when I was young. And I became an anesthesiologist, and I did basically ultrasound guided injections to put nerves to sleep so that you could do surgery. So I would put all the nerves in the arm to sleep, and then you could do surgery without putting somebody to sleep. So I'd give them sedation, and so I spent about 10 years running surgery centers and doing ultrasound guided injections with numbing medicine. And then, but that whole time while I was doing that, I was interested in integrative wellness. And so I was taking kind of Mark Hyman type of classes, and even some of the classes that he taught, and but didn't know him, and was studying Chinese medicine. I got a doctorate of medical Qigong, studied yoga for a long time with a famous person named Arkady that's super amazing, and was sort of basically trying to integrate the knowledge and wisdom and perspective of basically Eastern and integrative approaches, traditional approaches to medicine, with sort of the Western, but really living kind of in a very Western, hardcore, sterile surgical environment. And then we started to find out that you could put other things around nerves like growth factors or peptides or other stem cells and into joints and into fascia. And so then I basically sort of evolved as the field actually happened overnight, like in my life. It didn't exist when I started practice. And then started doing a lot of ultrasound guided regenerative medicine, and which has been something I've been doing forever. And then I basically integrated that with the wellness and integrative approaches that we had to medicine. And so then my practice now is sort of a harmony of all of that.
So you mentioned peptides, and I want to spend time on injections. I think that's an area that is on the cutting edge. We haven't talked about it yet in this show, and when I think of injections, I think of peptides, I think of NAD, dare I say, semaglutide, Ozempic, lots of IV, and many people we know in common who are on the cutting edge, including Mark, who goes to you when he's in a pinch, are turning to these types of interventions. So let's go there. What are the benefits? And I know that this is can maybe walk us through all the types of injections you practice and walk us through the benefits of each one.
Maybe better than the benefits would be, what are the categories of type of injections that people do? And so then the categories are going to range from injections that we help people do at home, that they do themselves, all the way to very complex, sophisticated injections that we do in the office here. The injections that people do at home can range from things like vitamins, like you hear that people can do NAD as a subcutaneous shot. And used to be we would do it with needles and syringes. Now we do it with little insulin syringes, which makes it super, super easy to do and super easy to travel with. And so it can be a very helpful tool for some people. And NAD is mitochondrial enhancing, and I know you've sort of talked about it on your show. And so it has a diversity of effects that are in the anti-aging and sort of wellness detox pathways. In terms of peptides, there's a host of different peptides that fall into a bunch of different categories. There are some peptides that tell your brain to secrete and make more growth hormone. And so there's a hormonal category. There's a bunch of peptides that are helpful for gastrointestinal function. There's some peptides that are helpful for immune function. It turns out our immune system is embedded in our nervous system and in our gut. And so a lot of the immune peptides can be helpful for other systems. And a lot of the immune peptides tend to be fairly helpful for pain, which is fairly interesting. There's some peptides that regulate metabolism and then can be helpful to some extent for weight loss. And so then that's Ozempic in that whole category of peptides. And then there's some specific peptides that are sort of helpful for neurological aspects. And so then just as a high level with broad brushstrokes, you begin to realize, wow, so then you can just about influence all of medicine, all of systems-based biology with different peptides that, and some of those we use them in the office, and sometimes people use them at home. And so you have a fairly big diversity there. And so then, that leads to sort of the follow-up, which is, our goal is to, at a high level, meet people, understand their needs and preferences and who they are, understand their story and what their life is about and what they're trying to achieve. And then to use a broad set of tools, some of which may be peptides that they could inject at home, some of it which might be supplements, a huge amount that would be lifestyle biohacking. And then we have the stem cells and sort of the bigger type of injections that we do in office, and then kind of coordinating all of that to optimize total wellness.
Got it. So let's lot to cover. Let's go back to NAD. Can you talk to us? Let's start there, and then we'll go down the peptide list in terms of hormones, gastroimmune, pain, weight loss. That's going to be a fun one. And then we'll touch stem cells as another beast. I don't know if we'll get that today, and I think that's like a separate episode. But let's start with NAD. What does the science say about the benefits, the risks, who can benefit?
Okay, so then NAD is a great topic. I like to say that biology is like an assembly line. And on that assembly line, if you went into Ford Motor Company, you'd see an assembly line and you see a bunch of things that are just low cost little aspects of the assembly line. They put a carpool sticker on it. Didn't cost any money, didn't cost hardly any effort, and so didn't take much energy. So they just slap that on and it just moves down the assembly line. There are some reactions that are basically expensive reactions that require energy to happen. In a car example, putting a door on, you got to hold it, you got to use a bolt. It's going to take a bunch of energy to do that. We have these little, we call them redox, but they're oxidation reduction little cycles within the body that drive expensive biochemical reactions. And so NAD plus exists in an oxidized state. And then in the assembly line of biochemistry, what NAD plus does is it donates an electron and facilitates a reaction, and it converts itself into a low energy state. Then the body recycles it back into its high energy state. So we have NAD constantly in every cell in our body all the time, going from a high energy state to a low energy state and facilitating expensive biochemical reactions. Those could be either making energy in your mitochondria, those could be turning on DNA repair, those could be turning on the sirtuin superfamily, which has to do with extending longevity. So there's a huge diversity of things that NAD does. I got into it more than 10 years ago because we were working with a lot of people that had addiction. And one of the most expensive biochemical reactions in the body is breaking down alcohol. Every time you break down alcohol, you lose 2 NAD molecules. And so, just like walking around town, if you had $50 in your pocket, you'd kind of feel rich and you could go get a coffee if you wanted one. If you're walking around town and you got a good amount of NAD in your body, you've got a whole bunch of potential energy that you can use to either detox or run different pathways that are needing to be run. And so then initially for the addiction people, we gave super high doses. Now we give a lot lower doses generally. And we combine it with other things that are synergistic with NAD. It turns out there's a bunch of supplements that will help drive NAD. NMN and nicotinamide riboside are 2 of them. And then there's the controversy because NAD can stimulate growth. There are some people who say you shouldn't be taking NAD if you have cancer. And so then this is a evolving topic that, I just generally follow that, mainly just because from a medical legal perspective, I don't want the hassle of it. And yet there are some people, it's all over the map what people say. Some people will say, there's a lot of controversy on this, and I don't think there's one right answer to it, but just know that there's some controversy for people with cancer. But overall, I think it's a very safe thing to do, very helpful for people to get off of addictive tendencies. And it's one molecule of 100 that we use to sort of regulate and balance biology.
So it sounds like the promise is one can help people who are dealing with addiction. Is it about longevity? Is that the secondary benefit? Is there a feeling attached? Do you feel energy?
I would say the secondary benefit is energy. And the secondary benefit would be probably a energy and helping people with brain fog and helping people feel better.
I got my black coffee. Is that?
I've got I was at my friend's house and I stole their coffee cup. What I would say is that of all of the places where we have those expensive biochemical reactions going on, there are more of those reactions happening in our liver and our brain than anywhere else. And so we use more NAD in our brain and liver than anywhere else for detox pathways and also just for metabolic activity. And so I think to one extent, taking NAD improves cell function. And then as you improve cell function, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so if you improve metabolic activity of the cells in your brain, you think more clearly and more cogently. And so then I think that plus, and then, I always tell this story, but I think it bears repeating at some level. And that is, if your NAD levels are low because you drink too much, and then you don't feel good, then there's one option is just drink more. That's the first thing. And so then people get into this vicious cycle of alcohol. And so, we've sort of, one thing that I have found is I get people kind of on an algorithm of using NAD and peptides, and for a gigantic swath of my friends and myself, coming out of COVID, almost everybody hardly drinks anymore. I think that's just because if you get your cell functioning working really well, there's just less tendency to drink, even though, like, I love alcohol, but it's just, if you can help people do it super easily with almost no effort, then that's a win. I mean, and that's not hardcore addiction. Hardcore addiction, I have to tell you, is a 100% full court press that takes almost everything that you have. And when we deal with that, we do stellate ganglion blocks, we do ketamine, we treat the vagus nerve, we do a lot of NAD, we do peptides. And so, and that just goes to show you that almost every problem that we deal with exists on a spectrum. And so, just like you could be in a hospital bed and completely non-functional with autism, or you could be a tech CEO running a company that just is a little bit emotionally unavailable. And so but there's a spectrum between those, but there are somewhat physiological processes that are consistent across that spectrum. And so then in the same way, addictions could be a spectrum. And so many problems that we face. And so then we feel that we can shift people to a healthier side on the spectrum without a lot of effort, but with empowering people to understanding what their biology is, and then starting to track, and then once you have enough power to begin to control your biology, it's super empowering for feeling free and alive and living, kind of, and feeling well.
And in terms of longevity, do we have any idea yet of injecting NAD may extend life by a certain number of years? Or
longevity is this sort of nebulous topic, because then you say, well, how are we going to extend longevity, and by how much, and then what are we going to do? In a way, it's a little bit of a black box, because we're sitting here and we're trying to postulate what's going to happen in 80 years from now. Okay. And so then we're extrapolating a little bit from the people in the blue zones that made it to 100 and made it there healthily. And so we're sort of trying to look at those people and say, what did they do? And then how could we contextualize that, put it into our life, and then extend our longevity?
Right, because they weren't doing any of this. They weren't supplementing. They're not doing injections. They're drinking wine. They're walking up hills. They're hanging out with friends.
Exactly. Now, and if they were doing that, they were doing that moderately. And so then one of the keys is to do almost everything moderately. That's like one of my great keys. Like right now, almost everything that I do is moderate. So I feel kind of super great about that. Um, I what ha, the way that I think about longevity is, imagine that your biology is like a portfolio. And imagine I was looking at that like I was a hedge fund manager or a money manager. And essentially, what I'm trying to do is manage risk out of that portfolio. The first thing on longevity is to manage all of the obvious risk out, because that's like the low hanging fruit. And so then addiction, is there, and so then the next thing is you go talk to the smart internal medicine people, and then you say, hey, what should we do? And they're going to say, you got to manage blood sugar, you got to make sure they don't have that type 2 diabetes, you got to make sure they don't have metabolic syndrome, high obesity, high blood pressure, and high blood sugar. And so then going in and actively managing all of that stuff and taking that risk out of the portfolio of your health.
So then how do you think about some of the screening like Pronovo is in terms of thinking about managing risk? I think there's consensus in that the earlier you catch, say, look, pancreatic cancer, for example, is a killer, probably the worst type of cancer one could ever want. And the big problem there is usually it gets discovered too late. There's not much one can do. But if you're able to manage that risk and maybe screen for that earlier, you can catch it and live a long, healthy life. So how do you think, that's one example? How do you think about early screening across the board?
That is a great one. And then what I like to say is that I'm here in Silicon Valley, and so the computer chip in this phone has been doubling every 2 years since 1969, Moore's law. And so then the what's available to me and what we're doing in our practice is more than doubling every 2 years. And so then there's a exponential growth in our ability to pay attention to things. Now then, if you stratified paying attention to things and then a dollars and cents investment out, and then you said, hey, what if you said, hey, I'm going to spend some money, what's the most effective thing that I could do? I would say get a hemoglobin A1C. It'll give me a 3-month measure of your blood sugar, and it costs like $5. So then everybody in the planet should do that, because then I would get everybody in the planet to then begin to regulate and modulate blood sugar. And this could be 1 billion people on the Indian subcontinent in like 10 years that have diabetes. And so then this could be worse in the Middle East. And so then we have an exponential growth of these problems. And so that at a low cost, sort of thoughtful strategy, we're going to start to manage these things, which would be kind of like from the ground up. Now then you say, and so from a longevity perspective, how do we think about screening? The thing that you mentioned is a cancer screen. And so the cancer screen is a much more expensive screening that people are now beginning to go out and do. And so for cancer screening, one, we do something called a liquid biopsy from a company called Grail, but there's a couple of different ones that we use that will screen for like 50 cancers, and you can look to see if there's cancer stem cells in your blood. To me, that totally makes sense, and I do that for all of our patients. We do that screening. We also will do a whole body MRI for a lot of people. That whole body MRI is a screening MRI. It's not like a perfect MRI, like the quality of MRI that you would get on your shoulder if you tore your rotator cuff. It's a little bit of a screening, but then as they're screened, then what they do is they will look in all of the obvious areas for cancer. And so we've been doing this for a couple of years, and I'm using Brinuvo as part of a clinical trial that we're doing for FSHD, which is a form of muscular dystrophy, to look at the amount of fat and muscles the muscle and the inflammation of muscles, and it's something that happens all over the body. And so we track myositis, and so we're using that, and so we use Prenuvo both on the injection side of things, and then also as a screening. We've had two people in our practice that got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, found it out of the blue. It was early and had total resections and are fine.
Wow. I'm assuming were there any signs?
No signs. And so then you say, oh, okay, but that's kind of a miracle. You know what I mean? Because that was, how many people are you going to need to do to find that? Quite a few probably. And so, I think that the screening part is early. And then from a longevity perspective, you're thinking about the simple metabolic stuff that you can fix ground up, like blood sugar. You're thinking about the chaotic big problems like heart, neurovascular, neurological, immune. And then in the middle, you've got optimizing the body, because what I have found, and that's one of the other reasons we do the Prenuvo as a screening. And then as a screening, I do an ultrasound where I look at every joint and every nerve in the body. And then basically what I'll tell you is, for me, and I'm an injection doctor, so I'm biased, but for me, that's the most important thing, because what happens is you, in our lives, you see people. I have millions of friends that love us, that are casually interested in us in their 30s and early 40s. People find us when they're 54, and they're super interested in us because all of a sudden the body is starting to break down. 64, 65, those problems, if you don't fix those musculoskeletal problems, start to compound. And then in your 70s, it's 2 or 3 problems that you can't fix. It's almost like they go off a cliff, because all of a sudden they can't work out, they can't move, they can't do things. And so then all of a sudden they lose all of the health benefits of movement. And if you lose those health benefits of movement, I think that has more of an anti-longevity effect than anything else. And so then our philosophy is aggressively treating the body and optimizing it. And then in parallel to that, paying attention to the screening stuff, because over time that's exponentially getting better, and then doing everything that we can do around that. But then we focus on the body as along with kind of a total wellness approach to everything.
So before we come back to the peptides, how does one know in their, say, 20s, 30s, 40s that they're doing okay here? And what are the things they can do besides injections from a lifestyle perspective to ensure they're thriving in terms of their body and how they move?
That is like the $1 million question. And I would say part of that is just find somebody that's thoughtful, that you can talk to, that it can think about you broadly and try to understand who you are and what you're up to. I would recommend going through at a relatively young age a broad, call it Mark Hyman style functional medicine, assessment. And he actually did something. I'll give you a plug. He's got a company, and I'm on the advisory board for them, called Function, like think functional medicine. And then basically he took all of his lab tests, and he's a genius at basically looking at lab tests and then going, oh, okay, that pattern is classically associated with, let's say, mold, or that pattern is associated with autoimmune disease. And so and they're relatively low cost. And as a 1.0 strategy, getting some functional medicine testing, get some testing of your gut, look at your microbiome, and then do all and then do all of the low cost stuff. Figure out what your fitness is, maybe check your VO2 max, see what your blood sugars are, and do some light cancer screening. And so put that together in sort of a rubric that would make sense to you. And then what's going to happen is that's going to give you a bunch of data that you can respond to. And so then they say, we're in Silicon Valley. They say he or she who has, or they who have the most data win. And so then now what we're doing is gathering a little data and then tracking and trending. And then what I have found is that the more that I begin to pay attention to that, then that's just like driving, and I'm just kind of navigating towards fairly optimal biology easily.
Right. I'm due for my 28 vials of blood. I see Dr. Frank Littman tomorrow. We'll see how I do. I do it twice a year, and I encourage everyone to get some basic blood work and basic genetic testing and the stool testing I've done, Genova, just to get baseline understanding. But you mentioned VO2 max, and I think that one I hear more and more about to assess one's cardiovascular fitness. Can you talk a little bit more about VO2 max? And I promise we'll get to the peptides.
Honestly, we talk about anything you want. I'm happy to talk about anything, and really all of it is interesting as anything else. If we're going to use our body, we want to be able to use it efficiently. And so then one thing is to say, let's track what how efficiently and how well and how our body uses oxygen when we're exercising. And so then they put a mask on you, and then that we measure lactate, and then have you do a workout. You can do it on an exercise bike, you can do it on a treadmill, you can do it running, there's a company in Northern California that's a kind of a bunch of tech kind of people called Aperion. And that's where I send people for my VO2 max, and they're super amazing at it. They're like the best people I've ever seen at it. And so then I use that a little bit as a baseline to see where people are, and then that goes back to just giving me a little data. And so then if your VO2 max is low, because I can compare it to a norm of what it should be for your age, then I'm going to have you do a little cardio and work on that. Also, if your VO2 max is really good, that is functionally kind of like passing a stress test. And so it tells me, oh, okay, cardiovascular, they talk about the horsemen, the four horsemen, the cardiovascularly, the thing that kills most people is heart disease.
And so essentially for folks to understand, this is a cardiovascular test. You're getting on a treadmill or bike and you push till you can't push anymore, and then you get a score, essentially. Inexpensive, expensive test anyone can access.
The motif of the clinic that I told you is a high-end clinic, and so at Aperion, but they're better at it than anyone that I've ever seen, but it's relatively inexpensive test.
So we're going to come back to peptides, and I'm going to start with probably the one that is the most controversial, the one that is most in the news, and that is semaglutide, also known as Ozempic. And before I get your opinion on this, I'm just going to read. I found this interesting when I stumbled upon the website that listed all the side effects, which include inflammation of the pancreas, change in vision, low blood sugar, kidney problems, kidney failure, serious allergic reaction, gallbladder problems, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, stomach, constipation, and so forth. But there's a promise of weight loss here. And also, I thought it was interesting. We were talking about this before the show. I recently listened to Peter Attia talk about this. I believe it was on Megyn Kelly's show, where he did DEXA scans on his patients, which he pointed out the FDA did not do in the trial, pre and post semaglutide, and that he found that the weight loss, 2/3 of the weight loss was lean mass, and 1/3 of the weight loss was fat mass. So essentially, people were getting lighter, but also fatter and becoming, maybe they're wearing smaller jeans, but less healthy. And the other thing he found, which I thought was interesting, is he said he tracks all of his patients' heart rate overnight, and he's been doing so over the past 3 years, and found that those on this drug, their resting heart rate was going up 8 to 12 beats per minute, which is not good for longevity. You want a low resting heart rate. And I'll add, what we also don't know is what happens when you stop taking this thing. Uh, you would presume you gain back the weight, but I'll pause there because I think that I'm presenting the some of the risks here and some of the downsides. But again, it's nuanced and it's developing. I want to get your take, but I just wanted to start there.
Okay, that's a good one. So then obviously, like, Peter Attia is like one of the greatest doctors in the world. And so he's a high level, super thoughtful person. I don't know him personally, but his reputation precedes himself, and he's a great doctor. Interestingly, and that's a good one, a lot of times the stuff that I do is stem cells and sort of at the high end of sort of integrative and world that a lot of times the doctors at Stanford and UCSF are not doing. I came from UCSF. It turns out Ozempic is branded and a thing. 90% of the use of Ozempic, historically at least, has been by endocrinologists and diabetes doctors that are using it to manage patients in very traditional settings. And so this is a sort of more of a traditional pharma type of drug that is used broadly in straight medical industrial complex Western healthcare type of clinics. It has a host of benefits that it sort of helps with insulin sensitivity, helps with blood sugar, and as a result, it's fairly helpful for a lot of people with diabetes. It will have some benefits vascularly, and so then that may have a cardiovascular benefit in terms of regulating the cells that line the inside of the blood vessels, the endothelial cells, and there may be less heart attack and stroke for people with high blood sugar who are taking it. So that's a good one. However, it can cause a little bit of nausea, and it will definitely make you eat less. And people were like, "Oh, did you say it makes you eat less?" And so then suddenly it kind of came onto the scene as a weight loss molecule. Now, it goes back to, we're having kind of like this blood sugar conversation. Having high blood sugar is so catastrophically bad for your health that you could do something that has a moderate amount of negative side effects and still it would be an overwhelming win, because you're helping something that creates so much difficulty in our bodies over time. And so then that's that. So then break apart some of those side effects. When you don't eat and you don't get enough nutrition, then you will start to lose weight. And so some of that is fat loss and some of that is muscle loss. By comparison, what I'll tell you is I spent the first half of my life running surgery centers, and I was actually, for a time, only because they forced me to do it, because I was like a young person. I was a medical director for the weight loss surgery program at Good Sam. And so then we would do bariatric surgery where they would cut your intestines to make you eat less. I always tell people I spent the first half of my life putting people to sleep and doing surgery, and I'm spending the second half of my life waking them up and preventing surgery. The crazy thing about that is that population, you see those people 10 years out, and you will see chaotic problems of muscle loss. They don't have any nutrients, and they don't have a way, they can't go reverse the fact that they haven't had any nutrition for 10 years. And so on the surgical side, and then on many sides of weight loss, there are overwhelmingly bad problems that happen from the malnutrition. That being said, I have a lot of people who will microdose semaglutide. I have a lot of people who will get a benefit of eating less. and they will instead of doing it once a week, they'll do it every 10 days, or they'll do it 1 week on a Wednesday at a full dose, and they'll eat less over that weekend. And then the following week, they'll do a half dose and eat a little bit more normal. So there's a lot of ways to sort of begin to manage that. Cardiovascularly, a little increase in heart rate is a little bit suboptimal, but compare that to the real people with coronary artery disease risk, then you're lowering their risk. And so then basically it's not a cure-all. It's not it's not the only solution, but but one thing and what I do is I say, if you want to do this, and I'm not a person that's marketing trying to get people to come to talk to me about this, but educationally, what I would say is I tell people, I'm going to teach you how to eat totally moderately like we do. And me and Barb, happy birthday, Barb. It's Barb's birthday. Me and Barb used to always go to San Francisco, and a lot of times we would go have two dinners. Like I'm like a hobbit, like a second dinner. And so then now we eat so perfectly and moderately. And so and what I found is once you sort of overcome the conditioning of eating too much and you learn how to do it. And so then I just think of semaglutide as this tool that you use, cycle on and off. And then I combine that with other things. And then next thing you know, you're fine.
And look, the way I'm thinking about this, I want to be empathetic. There are a lot of people who are obese and have really struggled with their weight and have tried everything and nothing works. And this is possibly a tool. With that said, it's not for everybody. And another side effect I think I forgot was thyroid cancer. There are like serious side effects. And I think the other thing, big picture, as you mentioned, metabolic health, metabolic syndrome, weight's a component, but there's a difference between healthy lean mass versus fat mass. And there's skinny fat. We've talked about this before. Hyman talks a lot about this. And so just because you're skinny, just because you weigh less on the scale does not necessarily mean you are more metabolically fit. You could be, in fact, heavier or quote unquote fatter, but be in much better metabolic health than someone who weighs less. And I think our cultural obsession with weight, we need to distinguish between lean muscle mass and fat, obviously. And I think that's something. It's not good. I don't think anyone thinks it's a good idea to lose more lean muscle mass than body fat.
And then there's a bunch of cool biohacking things. We have an M-Sculpt machine, and so it's basically like these gigantic. They look like defibrillator pads, but it causes you to do a super hardcore electrical contraction, and then it runs a radio frequency, high temperature, and so you can lose fat a little bit that way. But then there's two types. I always say that's a good one. There's two types of patients, and then there's two types of doctors. There's one patient that's hoping that you're going to tell them, guess what? I figured everything out, and you're never going to have to work out the rest of your life. And there's the doctors that kind of go along with that. And then there's another patient that's hoping that I'm going to tell you, you're going to have to work out, Jason, every day for the rest of your life. And I'm going to support you in that. And then that's going to be our journey. And then that is the side of the equation that we're on. And so then what we're thinking about peptides and injections and diet and lifestyle and biohacking and nutrition from that perspective. From the perspective that we are doing all of this to facilitate an exercise algorithm that has incredible benefits, and that through the totality of all of that, we will use that to optimize the body and kind of manage things. And then that's longevity.
So anecdotally, I hear a lot of people taking this specific pharmaceutical, maybe lose a couple pounds. They want to look good for a wedding or an event, but they're really not obese. This has just become, I've got maybe 5 to 10 to 20 pounds to lose. And I don't want to work out as much, or I don't want to change how I eat. That unfortunately, I think, is a use case. With that said, in your view, who is this really for? Who can really benefit, and who probably shouldn't consider taking this one?
The semaglutide, it's a tool that's a reasonable tool to try for people who are struggling with weight, who have cardiovascular and metabolics, let's say type 2 diabetes. That population is going to do really well, basically based on the data. Um, and so then so the deck's going to be stacked in terms of helping them in their favor. For people who want to lose a little bit of weight, I think it's an off-label thing that's intriguing to try, that I would think about trying. I would think about cycling on and off, and I would think about using it as a tool to help getting in touch psychologically with food. Because what I think happens is a lot of times we have a little bit of anxiety. And then in the anxiety and stress, if you eat and put some calories in, the blood rushes away from your brain. You get a little, if you have a little leaky gut, you get a little bit of a fight or flight kind of stimulus. We feel better, and it helps our anxiety. And so then a lot of people that are overeating because they're using they're using food as a tool to help their anxiety. Now, what a lot of my friends that have actually, I didn't suggest it to them. They came to me and had me write it for them. But then they tell me, you know what? I don't feel that anxiety around food anymore. And then as a result, it allowed me to get more present to just connecting and being kind of like this. And in connecting and then realizing that there's a way out of the anxiety around food, a lot of them also said that got them to and out of the anxiety around alcohol. And so then within that, if you can get to that sweet spot and then get through that, then basically you're free. This is my philosophy, but it's borne out for me in my life. Everything that I sort of overcome, it's like, oh, it's almost like a switch that you got. Oh, okay, I'm not overeating anymore. And so then these are tools that are not lifelong permanent tools. These are just tools that give you some training wheels to sort of regulate your biology.
Bridge.
It's a bridge.
And look, my view is evolved. Supplements, for example. Like, I love supplements. Supplements is a business of ours, and I would argue my our methylation support product, like, saved me from my homocysteine. My listeners are sick of me telling this story. It was 63. I got it to 10 through supplements. Like, unbelievable. Every doctor, when I'd say 63, I remember when I first told Mark, he was like, "What?" But my view is, you always want to be minimizing. At least that's how I found myself about a year ago. All of a sudden, I was taking 20 capsules a day, and I'm like, "Wait, what am I doing? What can I get off of?" And so I started to, cycle on and off and try to minimize, because I think you never want to be, whether it's a supplement or a pharmaceutical or any sort of treatment, you kind of want to minimize if you can. So to just close the loop on this one. So it sounds like those at risk for serious cardiovascular disease, diabetes, Ozempic could be, or semaglutide more broadly, is a solution for those who've really struggled with weight, and also think about it as a bridge. Microdosing sounds like it's a lot more reasonable approach.
Yeah, that would be great. And then remember, because I'm aware of all other peptides, this is just something that, like, all of a sudden everybody that we know wanted to start talking about. We're early in this experiment, and what's going to happen is, next time I talk to you, I'll know like 14 more things, because we learn very, very fast. And so this is one of those things where, like, 19 people call me and tell me something about something interesting every couple of days. And so then we will figure this out. But I like how you framed that. I love how you framed that.
Well, I'm sure it won't be the last time we talk about this subject on the show, and we will definitely have you back. We'll pencil it in a year from now so we'll come back to the other peptides in terms of, and there's, you mentioned hormones, gastrointestinal, immune, joint support, pain management. Of that bucket, what do most people come see you for?
It depends on what they came to see me for in the first place. And so then there's a lot of people that came to see me for, let's say, pain. And so then and then some people will come to see us for immune problems, and some people for neurological problems, and some with gastrointestinal problems. Those and sports medicine problems and joint stuff. And so then the biggest category that I personally am involved in is musculoskeletal and joint and sports medicine stuff. But then everybody that I then am working at that level with has one or two or three of the other things. And so then we're sort of, while I'm working on your shoulder, basically is an opportunity for me to kind of check in and, oh, how's it going? How's it going with gut health? How's it going with immune? And then this is, I'll tell you this one. And sometimes the story is useful as a way to understand things. And what I do is it's like I'm building with Legos my sort of worldview of our consciousness and our understanding of biology. And this is a little story as a digression, but then I'll kind of go into it. You and I did this as a joke with some friends this weekend. So you know that we use stem cells to treat joints, right? Now, how do you know what kind of stem cells are?
How about you give us a primer on stem cells? Because we haven't gone deep on this one for all the reasons.
At a high level, stem cells are kind of immune cells, and so stem cells are a little mobile pharmacy that are going around, and they have immune benefits. Okay, now one thing that can kind of derail us, and then this is just another thing that I have found, and that is that people who have a lot of immune problems tend to have a lot of pain. And that's because there are immune receptors on our nerves. And when our immune system goes sideways, then it can cause inflammation, either in joints or in pain. And so then we will take immune things like a stem cell and put it into a joint as a strategy of regulating the immune inflammation there. And you could almost say, teleologically, and we were designed this way, we tweak ourselves, we get inflammation. That inflammation is a signal for immune cells to kind of go in there and then turn that inflammation off and regulate it. And so the immune system is how we heal pain. It's how we heal orthopedic problems. It's how we use the immune system to work at every level in the body. Now, it turns out the best pain peptides are the immune peptides. And so and that's because the immune peptides regulate the immune system wherever you inject them. And so if you have pain in your elbow and you inject kind of by your elbow, it'll help in an area around the elbow, but it will also have some systemic benefits. And so then for pain, and to give you a quick answer, for pain, we like BPC 157, which is actually sort of more of a gut peptide. And then there's a fragment of thymosin beta 4 called TB 500 or thymosin beta 4 17 to 23. And that combination is our best sort of pain peptide. Often people will say, hey, I'd like to regulate my hormonal system. And so people will take a growth hormone peptide. Often, if people have a little bit of pain and then we find out everybody's got some gastrointestinal problems. So people will like BPC 157 is kind of another one of those ones, kind of a hybrid. It'll help for the gut and it'll help for pain. Um, and I would say those are common things that just about everybody is a little bit curious of. And in the old days, we only had one way to regulate anything, and it was like a cup of coffee. That was our. Now we have suddenly these tools that can regulate pain, that can regulate our gastrointestinal system. So then we're using basically sort of a functional medicine thought process, and then picking sort of a diversity of these. And then what I like to do is I like to actually have people cycle through the year where they get to try a diversity of these, and then we're teaching people how to use them, how to dose them, and then how to become familiar so that they can begin to control their own journey.
Well, it makes a lot of sense if you think about autoimmune in general. You think of weak gastro or weak gut microbiome, immune system, and then there's joint pain for a lot of autoimmune disease. The three are interconnected.
It's amazing. This is just going to be a thing where you're going to find more and more evidence in the next 5 or 10 years of the huge association between joint problems and gastrointestinal sort of autoimmunity. I was a friend of mine's a doc that did a board review course, and so I just went to the board review course to hang out with her, and it was all on autoimmune issues, and the entire course was about the microbiome. And it was how important it is to regulate gut health to prevent inflammatory arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, on all of those things.
On the subject of the microbiome, in terms of lifestyle, if we feel generally pretty good, if we're mobile, if we're have regular stools and we're active and eating relatively healthy, no joint pain, like we're just kind of we're feeling good. What are the things from a lifestyle perspective in terms of diet? I'm curious to optimize our microbiome. Sounds like anything special you've seen?
Oh, so then that's a good one. So then in the gut, the small intestine is sterile, and then the large intestine has more bacteria and yeast in it than there are stars in the sky. It's kind of a good one to think about. So the first thing that we do is I just kind of check and make sure, do you have gas and bloating or any problems when you have sugar or probiotics or prebiotics? Because if you struggle with that, you could have bacteria or yeast, and there could be hydrogen bacteria, methane bacteria, or yeast living in your small intestine. And then those people will be super triggered by everything that I'm about to say. And so I just do a real quick check, and it's kind of useful for me to do that even here, because then you go, if that's the case, then what I do is I do a SIBO breath test. Now, if we just went and talked to a bunch of our friends, that our mutual friends that we know, what were the most popular things over the last 20 years? The Candida diet. Why is that? Because what happens is a large percentage of people have some yeast and bacteria that starts to grow a little bit in the small intestine. And I think that's another problem that's a little bit like on the spectrum. And so then when you have that, then if you start to do fermentation in the small intestine, it bloats the small intestine, leads to leaky gut. And then the body goes, it puts visceral fat around the intestines, which becomes inflammatory and leads to metabolic syndrome. So this ties back to our whole thing. When do you get that? When you go to college and you start drinking beer. and And so then why is that? Because you're putting yeast and sugar in your small intestine. And so then you're driving yeast. And so then suddenly a idea avoiding fruit probably is not a good idea, but broadly it turns out to be an amazing idea if you're trying to decrease the effects of the bacteria and yeast in the small intestine.
Anything with sugar or fructose you would want to avoid.
So then 1.0, I just make sure that they don't have that. And then assuming that they don't, then the ingredients is to get some prebiotics and some probiotics that are just going to help either make the bacteria that you have a little bit healthier in there. So you're going to feed them. You're going to put a diversity of different probiotics in. And so then I use I use some spore-based probiotics. I use some actual probiotics. I use like four or five different ones, and I'm kind of always cycling through those. We are really big on the idea that oxalates tend to be a problem. Some foods have oxalates, and what happens is oxalates get absorbed in, and they're a salt, and so they get absorbed into your intestines, and then they crystallize out. So they can crystallize out in blood vessels around your valves, and then in joints. And so then I tell people avoid spinach and avoid Swiss chard. Those are the big ones.
You're talking to someone who had a kidney stone in their late 20s.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think a lot of alcohol and dehydration also played a role. If I were to,
yeah, good times. No, that's great times, but then that's a disaster. And so then, and we used to do kidney stone surgeries in my old surgery center, and so I'm all about preventing that. So then, and interestingly, for people who are susceptible to that, there's some probiotics that you could take that will help limit that. And then there's also, if you take calcium, it'll bind onto the oxalates in your gut and keep them in there. So there's a whole, but the oxalate conversation is kind of a tricky one to navigate. But those are two important things. Once you get past that, then for me on the diet front, I've done it all personally. And so then, I don't need to do keto. I like keto and it's okay, and I've done it. We've done a lot of intermittent fasting over the years. And so I've done a lot of intermittent fasting where we would intermittent fast till noon and then eat in a time restricted window. I encourage people to try that and experience what it's like and try that. I spent several years where I would fast like 1 day a week, sometimes 2 days a week. The 1 day a week fast is kind of amazing because it teaches you just totally overcome your food issues, because psychologically you're feeling normal and then you kind of go crazy and then it comes back to normal. And then once you kind of go through the fasting and get used to that, then you're basically steady from a food perspective. Like if you said, I can't eat anymore today, I'd be fine. So then that one's an interesting one. What do we eat? It's kind of cultural and philosophical. And where did you come from? I'm a hippie redneck from Montana, and so then I eat a fairly Mediterranean diet with a lot of elk and deer and wild meat and organic buffalo.
So can you just talk a minute about the wild meat versus the conventional, like not the conventional, the cow? So like elk, buffalo, bison versus cow, if one's going to have red meat. Can you talk about why it's beneficial to go with the wild versus the wild meat rather than the cow?
So one thing I'll tell you, when you eat that wild animal, you can taste the grass that they were eating. You taste how much sagebrush they were eating. You taste, you eat a buffalo from Alaska that was eating a lot of grass because it's so lush and green there, and the fat is like bright yellow, And so then, what I would say is nutritionally, they're going to be more nutritious. There's going to be more healthy fat in those animals. Um, uh, we, I would. We've gotten to this point with cattle farming where there's you're factory farming, and so a lot of those animals are given antibiotics.
We'll forget about the factory. If you just took like a grass-fed cow versus grass-fed elk, or
if you eat a grass-fed elk, you're just going to go. I mean, wild. You're going to go. Okay, that's the best thing that I've ever eaten in my entire life. And then you eat. And let's say you love organic beef, and then you eat elk, and you're going to go, oh my god, that meat, the grass-fed cow tastes bland by comparison. So, and I think it's going to be healthier. But and this is I didn't even know we were going to talk about this, but it's a relatively controversial topic.
Neither did I.
No, but guess what? So it's kind of amazing because Barb is a vegetarian, but she eats fish. And then I will get her to eat a little bit of a like buffalo liver and one of my partners is vegan. So, I play in this world through a huge diversity of cultural and religious perspectives on all of this stuff. But I just my personal experience by far, like we hate to go out to eat now because we eat so much better than any restaurant that I've ever been to.
Well, there's great ones in Coconut Grove. Next time you're in South Florida, we'll take you out to Crew's Kitchen in Los Felix. That's where we went with Archie and Carolina. So.
Oh, really? Oh, they're the best.
So, and the reason I asked was there's my limited understanding is if you look at bison, elk, venison, and assuming 100% grass-fed, all things equal, that there's more nutritional benefit than grass-fed beef in terms of amino acid profile, healthier fat, and so on. So let's go back to this. You mentioned Moore's law. Where are we going to be in 2 years? If we're in this stage of advancement where we're talking now in June 23. What are we going to be talking about in 25?
People are going to be more aware about the body. People are going to be progressively more aware about the body. Conversations like this, people are going to the academic institutions are going to begin to buy into doing more PRP for injections. People are in broad brushstrokes of even the surgeons that I know that were in my life, they didn't want to talk to me at all about anything that I do, but their wives all did. You know what I mean? Now everybody's totally into it. So at a consciousness level, our whole world is opening up to, okay, what can we do? How can we regulate it? How can we manage? And then in parallel to that, we have podcasts and we have an exponential increase in our ability to share information. And so then what happens is an idea comes out and then 50 people start doing it, and then that works. And there's another idea and 50 people do it, and suddenly you go, oh, that didn't work, or that had problems. And so then we are, as a healthcare, as the subsect of our society that's involved in healthcare, is learning exponentially faster than we've done before. And that's probably part of the Moore's law of healthcare. So for me, one thing is going to be the body. Number two is depending how things go at a regulatory level. Things like, semaglutide is like one tool. And so then suddenly I think people will become progressively more aware that they have a whole bunch of tools with peptides that they can begin to use to regulate their biology. And then what I think is going to happen, where we're going to be in 2 years, is people will begin to start to take more and more control. And then as that happens, that's going to have regulatory benefits because, somebody told me, they said, they're never going to take away hormones. And I go, oh, why is that? And they go, there's a lot of people in Congress on hormones, and they're not going to let you take those away. And so then in a way, one of my little things is we just need to do regenerative medicine for every single person in Congress. And then they're going to realize, oh, that's probably better than a steroid injection in my joint. And then we're going to hopefully will evolve in terms at a regulatory level of being more open to the integrative side of sports medicine.
So, in terms of all the tools, modalities, practices we now have at our disposal, and there are quite a many to choose from, what do you think is overrated? And what do you think is underrated?
Everything is overrated and everything is underrated. The overrated is every tool in the hands of marketing people is overrated. And then, but once you really begin to understand that tool and use that tool in an amazing way, you realize, oh, that tool is way better than I thought that it was, and so it's underrated. And so to give you sort of a highlight, the one thing that we do with the peptides and stuff that you're going to do at home to increase your growth hormone levels or regulate, aspects of your biology. The other thing that we do is we're looking through Prenovo and looking at all your joints and looking at all your muscles and looking at all your nerves, and then sort of building a total model of all of that. And then you say, well, what do we do? I use ultrasound guided injections, and I'll inject around the nerve that goes to a joint. I'll inject around a nerve that goes to a muscle area. I'll inject in the muscle by the central tendon of the muscle and the fascia, around the ligaments and tendons, kind of down by the joints, and then into the joint and even into the bone marrow and around the arteries. So then that's the totality of sort of what we do. How do we do it? We kind of have this model of assessment. And then you say, what do we use? Everything that can be used, from stem cells to peptides. But one of the most underrated, and this is my answer to the underrated, the most underrated thing is plasma. And so we can take blood out of your body, spin it, and get plasma. Now, what's happening right now is my heart's beating and sending blood that has plasma to my muscles and my arm. And then there's growth factors and stuff like that are in the plasma that are diffusing out into the muscle through the capillaries to go there. Well, what we do is we take and spin and take the red blood cells away and take that plasma and we'll use plasma for hydrodissection into muscles and around muscles and in those areas. And so then you'll be a little sore compared to some of the other regenerative solutions, but it's much lower cost. And so that's why I say, over the next 10 years, people, I predict, will do more and more plasma because it's low cost is something you can, on an iterative basis, do. And so then my philosophy is that in 2 years, more and more people will begin to realize that ideally they are going to want to have plasma or other growth factors regularly injected into their joints, into their muscles, into their nerves to maintain them at the health and age that they are at, and that we will be able to sustain and maintain their body at that age. And then everything else that we're talking about is just window dressing around that concept.
You mentioned the plasma. I had to get a bad root canal pulled a year ago. It was a 6-month process, and they pulled the root out, and one of the things they used was the plasma. And this was a rather, I would say, conventional dentist. I skewed slightly holistic, but used the plasma once they extracted the root.
Yeah. So then what happens is there's plasma has cells in it. What are those cells? Immune cells. And so then there's also platelets. And so then they may have concentrated the platelets and then injected PRP there. It may be that you're less likely to have an infection afterwards with that. They will add that now to surgeries. And so if you're going to get a rotator cuff, a lot of times they'll put some PRP in that tear. However, a lot of times, if you have a grade 1 or 2 tear, you're probably going to do better if you get somebody to inject PRP than to actually have the surgery. And so then we will see progressively more and more of that type of stuff. And the dental community has been fairly significantly embracing of a lot of the stuff that we do. So it's kind of cool. I've actually gone to dental meeting.
Interesting. So is there one thing that you think everyone can benefit from, no matter where they are in their health journey?
Exercise.
Any specific kind, or?
Well, I think probably a little bit of a hybrid of strength training and cardiovascular training, and so doing a little bit of both. So then what? Everything that we do is then to facilitate that. So, for example, a lot of times people will have pain when they exercise. That may be because they've got a tear in their muscle, or they've got fatty infiltration in their muscle, or they've got a nerve impingement that goes to that muscle. So we do hydrodissection of the nerve. We inject it into the muscle. So we're doing all of the stuff that we do to get that muscle working. Turns out you know what the side effect of putting plasma in your muscles is? Hypertrophy. So you get a little hypertrophy. And so then,
Which is what you want. You want that.
You want to be a little bit bigger, stronger, faster. And then as a result of that, that allows us to be functional in our movements. And so then I would say for me, it's almost like, 3 or 4 groups. Then if you think about then movement. So then what are our movement philosophies and groups that we're dealing with? Probably a real component is going to be the pro athletes. And so then they're just going through a car accident every weekend. And so then we're kind of putting them together and then trying to maintain, but they tend to be super great healers. There's everybody on us on the weekend warrior front that is doing a combination of some cardiovascular and strength training and high-end movement stuff. And, we were influenced by Pavel, like I did the RKC. And so then very interested in the strength and conditioning side of it, and then very interested in kind of the yoga side of it. And so then imagine when you're doing yoga, you're constantly torquing and stretching your joints. If you're not aware of what you're doing, you can injure those. And so then probably a significant part of my life is going to be about how to inject around all of those nerves, tendons, fascia of the joints and muscles that we use for sitting. And then once you put all of that together into one piece, now you're doing some intense anaerobic activities, some strength and conditioning, some introspective kind of sitting movement approaches, and then putting all of that together. And then everything that we do is just basically designed to support the diversity of all of that movement.
So our mutual friend Michael Bronner would probably say it sounds like TB12.
Oh, so then they are the greatest. They are the greatest. And then when I met Alex, and I started talking to him, Alex Guerrero, I realized, okay, well, we agree 100% on everything, body wise. And interestingly, they did that. It's kind of a clinical trial, what Alex did with Tom, which is, take care of him for all of those years. And then he had better longevity than really any quarterback in history. And so then that gives you a little bit of a insight. That's like a little N of one clinical trial for me, that is just looking from the outside of what they did, and then realizing, oh, okay, that was a touchdown. I mean, that was the absolute home run of what they did. And so then you say, in a way, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to apply those principles, and then not just in the arc of a 20-year football career or 25-year football career, but in the arc of maybe 125-year life. And so then now, and it's like, I texted him this weekend. I was like, oh, I have some friends in this one state. Who do we have? And so then imagine that realistically, we should all be treating ourselves like Tom Brady treated himself as a football player. Just project manage all of the stuff into your life, get super dialed in, and then now you're just managing that over time.
It's interesting. We haven't had Alex on this show. I should probably get him. It's interesting, and he does have a great case study in Tom, for sure. So, is there anything we didn't touch on that you would like to touch on, and where can people find you?
So, we're at bioreset.com, and the one thing we didn't touch on is that in parallel to everything that I've said, then and so the one thing, because we were going to talk about injections, and we can kind of go deeper into that, but remember I said there's these injections you can do at home. There's these injections that we do in the clinic in the United States, and a big part of that is me looking for low cost, amazing solutions that everybody could benefit from, that are fairly approachable. And so then that's like me doing plasma injections all over the body. But then one of the things that we do outside of the United States is a lot of work with stem cells and a lot of work with regenerative medicine stuff that you can do IV. And so then, out of the States, we're looking at exosomes and peptides and stem cells that you can put IV that float around in the body, and they float around and look for that inflammation to regulate and optimize that. And so then, that's something that has gotten a lot of PR from sort of some health influencers in the last couple of years, and it's something that we've been doing for 10 years. And so then that will exponentially grow in terms of how much interest there is in that, and then how helpful that is, because all of those things regulate the immune system. And if you regulate the immune system, it helps regulate pain. And so, it's a funny story. I got to tell you this. I remember vividly, I remember one of the attendings goes, I was at UCSF, and one of the attendings goes, hey, you need to go to the auditorium right now. There's going to be an amazing lecture, and we kind of figured it out, and this is going to be so amazing, and this is going to impact the next 15 years of your life. And I go, I remember I was so excited. And so then there was 7 or 8 anesthesiologists. And so we all go down there, and it's the year 2000. And they go down and they go, listen, we're here. We're going to give you a lecture. It's called Pain is the Fifth Vital Sign. And we need to pay attention to pain and regulate that, because if we regulate that, people are going to do healthier and do better. And so then all we had to regulate pain at that point was opioids.
Yeah, it was was this the Sackler family?
Basically, this is the same time that the Sackler family thing was happening. But we were just sitting there, and this was UCSF, and so we're trying to regulate. And the way that we're going to regulate this is to have longer acting, better narcotics that are going to keep people out of pain and keep them comfortable. And so then it was very in the moment of OxyContin, but this was not Sackler family. This is like board certified, super hardcore, the best anesthesiologist at the best anesthesia training program on the planet. So then what happened is, next thing you know, I see the devastation for the next 10 years in my clinical practice of every year people are on more and more narcotics, and narcotics is just the ultimate, chaotic sort of negative thing. So then you say, well, what is a better solution? On the international side, you've got, the stem cell front. And nationally, we're still doing adipose stem cells, and adipose stem cells are super helpful for pain. And so then that's another thing that I need to tell you about. We can harvest fat and turn it into nanofat, and then they put it in your face, called fat transfer, as an anti-aging technique, which we do. But then when you put it around nerves, it helps for nerve pain. And so then imagine we have plasma, placental matrix, growth factors, stem cells, out of the country stuff, and we're doing that to regulate the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, the musculoskeletal system. This is the solution to pain. It's largely immune-oriented stuff, but then that gets people out of pain and back into movement, which is sort of our fundamental philosophy. And then that's basically where we're going. And so then it took realistically 23 years to get here from that moment, which is kind of interesting.
Wow. Fascinating. Matt, thank you so much.
It was a total pleasure. It's super, super great to talk to you, and I can't wait to talk again.